Hi everyone, thank you for joining this tutorial, and this is part of the APSIM online seminar series. I am Jonathan Ojeda, and today I will talk about variance decomposition of model outputs using APSIM Next Generation. So the functionality of this is basically to identify the main contributors to the variance in different model outputs, and it has kind of requirements. So we will assume that the user of this tutorial has a kind of knowledge to create factorials in APSIM Next Generation, and at the same time some basic knowledge of Python, and particularly in the use of Jupyter Notebook or Jupyter Lab. Okay, so we will present the example. Today we will talk about a particular example which can be adapted based on your needs. We will present a factorial simulation in APSIM Next Generation, assessing 5 different factors: sowing date, nitrogen fertilization rate, cultivar, rain, and site. And at the same time, we will ask the model for 2 particular outputs: maize biomass and water drain, and we will particularly assess the contribution of each of those factors on the variance of the 2 model outputs. In the next slide, you will see things in green, which are related with the factor of analysis, and things in red, which are related with the model outputs. Okay, this is basically background. We will quantify 2 indices today, and they are called main effect and total effect. And they allow us to visualize in a really easy way the contribution of these factors on model outputs variance. So they are basically used to disentangle the variance caused by one source from the variance caused by the interaction and by other sources. So if we talk about main effect, it explains the share of the components to biomass and drain variability, in this case, because are the model outputs that we will assess today, without any interaction. So basically, if the main effect is 1, only the assessed factors explain the entire proportion of the model output variability. However, if the main effect is less than 1, residual exists, which means additional factors are required to explain this variability. That M should be ME, sorry, that is my mistake. Then when we talk about the total effect, this index represents the interaction of a given factor with other factors. So that means that high total effect values for a given factor denotes high interaction of that factor with other factors. Therefore, total effect doesn't include any residuals. Okay, if you want to read a little bit more and in detail the theory behind this analysis, I will provide references and links at the end of the presentation. Okay, let's go directly to the example. Here we have a simulation. I took basically a factorial from the example and the example folder in APSIM, and I changed the factors to create the experiment that we will need today. So if you look at the experiment, you will see a combination of different sowing dates, fertilizers, cultivars, and sites. So this is a total permutation. So basically all levels of each factor are combined with all levels of the other factors. If we look at particularly in sowing date, you will see 3 levels: 1st October, 1st November, and 1st December. So we are talking about maize here. In terms of nitrogen fertilization, you will see 3 levels: 100, 150, and 200 kilos of nitrogen at sowing as a nitrogen fertilizer. And cultivar, 3 different maize cultivars. So in terms of sites, I took my own approach to create 3 different sites in terms of water dynamics, but you can create your own sites, or you can add different factors here. So basically this is just an example to demonstrate the approach. So if we enter in the site, you will see 3 levels: dry, mid, and wet. And what I did was I just added different weather files, soil files, and different configurations of the irrigation to create different water dynamics in each environment. So in the wet environment, the automatic irrigation is on. However, in the mid and in the dry environment, the automatic irrigation is off. So basically in the dry and mid environment, the water input is only rainfall. At the same time, I create differences in the soil. So this is a high plant available water capacity soil. This is a mid, and this is a low plant available water capacity soil. Basically, the idea of this example was to create a range of water dynamics between environments to demonstrate how the effect of each of the other factors contribute differently to the variance of the model output when you change the environment. Okay, so as you know, this is basically what is defined in the experiment, but then here you have the base simulation, which is a common simulation for all experiments. In total here, we have 81 simulations, and it are long-term simulations, so basically from 1983 till 2011. Okay, so this is basically what is referring to the simulation. Now I will go to the source of the data. So I put all the files that we will use today in a GitHub repo. So basically you can have a look and find all the information and files that we will use today there. We will go directly to the repo. So if you don't have any GitHub account, you can create an account, and then you can enter and look for my account, which is JJ Guri. And then you will have, in my account, you will have a repository called APSIM-bar decomp. So there you will find a README file where I just explain the background and references. Then you will have a Jupyter notebook or Jupyter Lab file, which is called bar decomp-apsim, that we will talk a little bit later. Then you will have an environment file, which includes all the Python package required for the development of the code that we will use today. Then you have the APSIM Next file, which we just saw recently. And then you have the two MET files that I use for the simulation. So these three files are the outputs of APSIM. So basically, when you run the APSIM Next simulation, you will get these three outputs. The code that creates the visualization of the variance contribution decomposition is based or take as an input the .db file. So basically, this is the most important file that we will use to get the information from APSIM. Okay, so let's go to the code. Okay, here I just provide again more background and a couple of references. Here you will find the main reference that which was the base of this analysis, and then a couple of examples for different crops and different crop models where people already use this approach to quantify the contribution of different factors on the variance of model outputs. Okay, so basically here we have the required packages, which are in the environment file in the GitHub repo. As a first step, we will read the APSIM output from the DB file. And here we need to consider a couple of things. So basically, if you look at the report in the simulation, here we have the report, which is a common report of the APSIM simulation, and you will see that we have all the variables required. Here we have the date, we have the maize above ground biomass, and then we have the cumulative rainfall from sowing to harvest and the cumulative drain from sowing to harvest. Okay, so here is where you need to adapt the simulation accordingly with your objective. So if you need to analyze a different model output, you need to change here the model output. For example, if you want to assess the effect of the solar radiation or the temperature on the variance of a particular model output, you will need to write here the code to get that model output as a cumulative or mean variable from sowing to harvest. So at the same time, if you want to assess, for example, what happened with the nitrogen in plant or other variables, you will need to ask APSIM for those variables. This is just a single example, and because that we have just 4 outputs. And the date basically is driven the year, so then the year is used for an aggregation, so basically I am using the date for that. Okay, so let's go again to the code. Here, I just explained what I did and which will be the factors of analysis. Sorry, here I missed rainfall, so I should put rainfall here too. So because rainfall is part of the report, and we have rainfall here. So what is doing this cell is basically reading in the current directory and then passing the name of the DB file. If you are generating a different simulation, you will need to adapt this name accordingly with your file name. And then what is doing the code is basically reading from the report, from the table, and getting the information. And this row is basically to change the name from maize weight to biomass. Here you are seeing a single data frame, which has all the information from the model. You can see here all the factors. So in that fertilizer, cultivar, site, and rain, or cumulative rain during the growing season, and which are the 2 assessed model outputs, biomass and rain. And the date is only used for carry the year, okay, which is then aggregated. So if we continue, this is a really important step of the analysis. So here we can see that factors of analysis can be categorical or can be continuous, talking about numbers. For example, for the cultivar, we know that we have 3 cultivars. For the sowing date, we know that we have 3 sowing dates. And for the fertilizer, we know that we have 3 levels of fertilizer. However, the cumulative rainfall change every year, accordingly with the site and obviously with the weather conditions. Therefore, something is required for these continuous variables. What is needed is to convert these continuous variables to categorical variables. And to do that, I just create here a piece of code, but you can do your own code. And the only thing that you need to do is create, based on this continuous variable, you need to create a categorical variable. And here, for example, I just take the information from the rain for all years across all environments and all factors. And I got the percentile 33 and the percentile 66. And then using those percentiles, I create 3 categories. If the value of the cumulative rainfall was less than the percentile 33, I consider it as a low rainfall environment. If the value was between the percentile 33 and 66, I consider it as a medium environment, talking about rainfall. And if the cumulative rainfall during the growing season was bigger than the percentile 66, I consider this a high rainfall environment. So basically, then the third step is taking the information from this data frame plus the categorization of the rainfall and aggregating the information across years. So basically, the interannual variability will be behind this analysis, but it is not part of the factorial. So we are not looking here to see interannual variability or check how the interannual variability affects the variance of the biomass or brain or drain. Could be in a different experiment, but in this case, I am doing the average between years or across years, sorry, to assess the effect of sowing date, fertilizer, cultivar, cumulative rainfall during the growing season, and site on the variance of biomass and drain. So basically, this step is really important to get the final data frame in the way that the code will work. So here, if you have a different factor, you will see this in a different column. And then we will see that we can add an extra level of complexity, and we can calculate these indexes spatially. So basically here we will have 2 extra columns, which are latitude and longitude. And we will talk about that later. Okay, let's go to the final step. So in this step, this piece of code basically is the core of the analysis, and is taking the variables, which are biomass and drain, the factors, sowing date, cultivar, fertilizer, and rain. And then you will see that we don't have here site. Why? Because we will analyze the contribution of to the variance of these 2 variables for each of these 4 factors across environments. So basically, we will use today the site as a X variable to assess the contribution of these factors across environments. And you will see this easily later when we look to the plots. So what you need to do is choose one of these factors and say, well, I want to assess this across sites, across rain environments, across cultivars, or across sowing dates. So basically, if you select sowing date to put in the X category, you will need to put here the levels of the sowing date instead of the level of the site. So basically, here will appear site instead of sowing date. Okay, so I know that maybe it's not easy to understand, but I'm more than happy to answer any question later and discuss through GitHub. Okay, let's continue. So here, this is a really important line. So here we need to specify which is the factor that we will use in the x-axis of the plot. So across which factor we want to assess the variance contribution. In this case, we want to assess across site, or in this case is in the 3 levels of the site. And here basically are the same factors that we select here. Well, then you have a lot of information. I commented it a lot just to tell users how to adapt the code to generate analysis with extra factors. For example, this piece of the code is mainly related with the main effect section. So you will need to create a different summary or an additional summary if you are adding more factors. So basically, reading the comments, you will figure out how to adapt the code. Well, then a lot of coding related with the plotting that we can pass a little bit. And this part is about the total effect. So you will need to edit it if you want to add extra factors. And let's go directly to the figures. Okay, I will minimize. Okay, good. So basically, this is the product. What is doing this coding? This coding is producing a visualization of the main effect and the total effect across sites for the 2 variables, biomass and drain. So if we put focus, for example, in the analysis of the main effect for biomass across environments, we can see that when we move from dry environment to wet environments, the contribution on the biomass variance of cultivar increase, green. And the contribution on the variance of biomass from rainfall decrease, which is logic because in a wet environment, water stress is not an issue. So basically, which is the main contributor of the variance of that biomass? Cultivar. And second, fertilizer. So you will see two gray pieces of the bar here, and the gray pieces are other factors that were not considered in this analysis. And you can see that, interestingly, we got more residuals in the dry environment, which means that we have other factors, and which is logic because in a dry environment, the amount of stresses are increased. So that means that other things are playing a role on the variance of the biomass for these particular environments. And when we are going from dry to wet, most of the variance on biomass is explained by cultivar and fertilizer. We can say more than 80 or 90%. So then if we move to total effect on biomass, basically what we are seeing here is how much each factor is interacting with other factors. And we can see that this change across environments. And for example, if we put focus on the dry environment, the most interacting factor is the rainfall, and this decrease when we move to wet environments, and then the interacting factor under wet environments, and we can say in most of the environments, is cultivar. So basically, if we need to conclude based on this figure, we can say that independently on the environment, the cultivar factor interacts a lot with other factors. So that will be the way of interpretation of this figure. Okay, so then, for example, we can talk about drain, and we can do the same analysis, and we can see here that for the main effect, the contribution of the rainfall decreased in a less weight than if we compare with biomass. So which means that under wet environments, the rainfall even is producing a contribution on the variance for drain, however, not for biomass. So, and then we can see an increase again for the contribution of cultivar, and so on. So basically, you can do the same analysis for total effect for drain, and you can see that the figures are quite similar between biomass and drain. So the only difference is that the rain interacts again under the wet environments for drain, because we are changing the model output. So these kind of figures are quite interesting to analyze when we want to assess more than one model output at the same time and see how they contribute, how the factors contribute differently when we change the model output. Okay, so we can move now again to the PowerPoint, and just we can talk about other examples. So this is one of the examples that I show recently, and this is another another way to represent the main effect and the total effect. So here you can see that the source of this was basically potato simulations for 30 years, long-term simulations, including different irrigation strategies, planting dates, across environments, because we have different rainfall accordingly with the year, different mean temperatures, and different solar radiation. So basically here we have extra factors that I didn't include in the tutorial today. And you can see that the way to represent here the results are across soils. So basically in the factorial in APSIM, you need to create the different soils as a factor. So basically then when you will get the results in the Jupyter notebook, you will get a column called soil, with different name of soils as a levels of that factor, which will allow you to create this kind of figure. And here, well, the main result was that, as you can see here, these are soils with high plant available water capacity, and when you move to the right, the plant available water capacity is reduced. So basically, when the plant available water capacity is reduced, the importance of irrigation strategy increase, and the importance of the planting date and solar radiation decrease, which they are connected. And basically, when I am talking about the importance, I am talking about the contribution of that factor on the variance of the model output. In this case, was tuber yield for potato. And then the same analysis can be applied for a total effect, comparing with what we did before with the example for the tutorial. Okay, then another example is that we can scale up this analysis and put the main effect and the total effect in a grid, and we can compare spatially how the contribution of each factor on the total variance affects different model outputs. And here you are seeing, this is from the same paper. So you can see the same factors: planting date, irrigation strategy, soil type, solar radiation, mean temperature during the growing season, and rainfall during cumulative rainfall during the growing season. This is cumulative solar radiation during the growing season. And you can see that for particular environments, so when the color is more red, the effect is higher, and when the color is low, the effect is lower. So you can see, for example, that for particular regions, some factors contribute more to the variance of the yield. And when you move to other areas, the factors that are affecting the variance of that output are different. So this is a really nice way to visualize how the variance of an output is affected differently accordingly with the space and spatially across a region. So this is Tasmania, which is an island in Australia. So you can read more about this looking at the paper. I will provide in the reference part. Okay, here you can see the main theoretical reference, which is the base of this analysis, and then 2 examples. The figures that we saw recently are from this paper, and then you have a look too, and I really encourage you to have a look to this paper, which is a really interesting paper. And then, well, here you have the code availability. So just you need to find my repo and looking at my account, GitHub account, and you will find all the files that we will use today. And if you want to contact me, just you can find my website, and I have my email there, and you can contact me, and we can talk about this analysis and expand the discussion. So yeah. Okay, so with this, we are finishing with the tutorial, and I hope that this will help you to address variance decomposition analysis in the future. Hope that you can follow the analysis that we did today, and thank you so much for joining this tutorial. Good luck.